I never imagined that one day I would feel so distant from him, so distant from everything we had been. My heart tightened the moment he said those words, with eyes as empty as the pain he was causing me. "We need some time," he said, almost without looking into my eyes. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't expect to hear that, not like that. He wanted to step out of our lives for a reason I still didn't fully understand. And in truth, maybe I didn't know if I was ready to keep living in a routine that, little by little, had become suffocating for both of us. Accepting the separation was a hard blow, but at the same time, something inside me sparked, as if the pain was freeing me from something I didn't even know I needed to let go of. During those first few days, my heart swung between the fear of losing everything and the relief of no longer having to deal with the emptiness that had settled between us. I was alone, but at the same time, I felt stronger than ever. Deep down, I knew I needed more than just the relationship to be happy. I needed myself, my essence, my independence. And then he showed up again. Only 3 days had passed, and in an impulsive move, he wanted to come back. I wanted him back, of course. My heart still beat for him, and the idea of rebuilding everything seemed tempting, but something had changed. I wasn't the same anymore. Something inside me had awakened, something I couldn't ignore. I looked at him, and it was at that moment that the hardest decision of my life began to take shape. Because right then, I knew it would be a path of no return. What would I choose now? Go back to living in the past, or follow what my heart truly desired? I never imagined that what started as a simple time apart request could turn into such an emotional roller coaster. My heart still raced every time I remembered the moment he walked back through the door, with that look of regret and hope mixed together. I was sitting on the couch, still trying to process the days of distance between us, and suddenly, there he was, with a forced smile, apologizing with words that I couldn't even make sense of because they sounded so desperate. "I want to come back," he said, almost in a whisper, as if fearing that if he raised his voice, I would send him away forever. And for a moment, I almost did. The pain he caused me seemed still so fresh, as if he'd just left yesterday, but there was something else stopping me from making the final move. Something deep inside me that screamed for him. I didn't know what to do. He wanted to come back, but what about me? What did I want? I stayed silent for a while, trying to organize the storm of thoughts that was taking over my mind. I knew I should be rational, that I should think carefully before making any decisions, but my heart, that damn thing, seemed to be betraying me. I looked at him there, his face marked by guilt, and something inside me told me he was more lost than ever. I wanted to believe he was being sincere, that the time apart had changed him somehow, but the truth was I no longer knew who he was. Have you ever felt like that? Like it's impossible to separate what you feel from what you know is best for you? I found myself in that dilemma. What I wanted wasn't as clear as it once was. What I knew for sure was that I needed space to breathe, to rethink everything. But there he was, begging to come back. And what he said sounded so genuine. It was a moment of complete internal confusion. I'm not someone who makes decisions hastily, but there, in the depth of my chest, something told me I had to be firm, that the time apart had shown me a part of myself that I no longer recognized. I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't the wife who settled, who quietly accepted the mistakes. I felt like I had evolved, like the separation had given me something I didn't know I needed, the chance to find myself again. But he wanted to come back, and that stirred something inside me in a way I couldn't explain. With every word, every look, I felt my resistance begin to weaken. And in that moment, in the middle of that emotional avalanche, I asked myself, what would I do if he was truly sorry? If he had changed, if he wanted to try again? What would I do if this was the last chance I would get to rebuild everything we had? My heart wanted to scream, yes, but my mind was distant, cautious. I had already been hurt too much to trust blindly in the promise of a fresh start. I knew the pain of losing everything was still too recent for me to take such a huge step. And then, without realizing it, I saw him looking at me, waiting for my response, as if everything depended on that moment. I could feel the anxiety taking over his body. The silence between us felt so heavy, so dense. I didn't know what to say. For a second, the longing for him enveloped me so much that I thought about hugging him, forgetting everything and going back. But no, something told me I couldn't do that.
Not now.
Not after everything we'd been through. What did I truly want? I didn't know. I only knew that the pain of separation, although intense, had brought me clarity. I needed more than pretty words and empty promises. I needed time. Time to heal, time to breathe, time to be myself without depending on anyone. But he wasn't willing to wait. He looked at me, and deep in his eyes, I saw something that broke me. A deep hopelessness. He couldn't wait. He didn't want to wait. And in that moment, something inside me broke. He wasn't willing to fight for us the way I expected. He wanted everything back, but he didn't want to wait. And I, despite still loving him, knew that this lack of patience was a reflection of something bigger. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. And in that instant, the words that left my mouth were so much more than just a response. I said, almost without wanting to, but with all the truth I felt, I need time. I need myself now. I don't know if I can go back to what we were before. Please understand me. And he, with that empty look, turned around and left. I was left there, alone, trying to understand the decision I had just made. Did I do the right thing? I felt an enormous emptiness inside, but also a strange relief. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones, deep down, had to be made. Now, I was alone, but somehow, I felt more whole. I really want to know, what would you do? If you were in my place, would you make the same decision? Or would you try to give love another chance? Tell me in the comments, because honestly, I'm curious to know what you think. I, at least, know that my journey is just beginning. What comes next, I don't know, but I know it's something I need to live through to understand. The days after he left were a strange mix of peace and chaos. There were moments when I felt like I could breathe again, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But there were also moments when the silence was unbearable. I woke up in the mornings, not hearing his voice, not feeling his presence beside me, and it hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had spent so much time focusing on the decision I had just made, on the need to be alone, to find myself again, that I didn't anticipate how deep the emptiness would run. And yet, in the quiet of those days, I started to hear myself more clearly. I started to feel a sense of independence that I hadn't realized was missing. There were no more compromises, no more quiet sacrifices to make just to keep the peace. I was free, but that freedom came with a price. As time passed, I found myself questioning everything. What if I made the wrong choice? What if my need for independence had cost me the love of my life? I spent countless hours staring out of the window, trying to find answers in the clouds, in the passing cars, in the small, everyday moments that used to be so ordinary, yet now felt so heavy. What had I really been running from? I had asked for space because I needed to rediscover who I was, but had I unknowingly been running from the person I loved the most? The person who had been my partner, my confidant, my best friend. And then there was the guilt. Oh, the guilt. It crept in when I least expected it. In those quiet moments when I was by myself, when the house felt too big, too empty, too full of memories of what we used to be. I felt like I had abandoned him. Like I had pushed him away when all he wanted was to be there for me. He had told me that he was willing to wait, that he was ready to fight for us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I had just been a little more patient, a little more understanding, we could have figured it out together. But no, I had chosen to take a step back, to focus on myself. And now I was faced with the consequences of that decision. I knew I couldn't change what had happened. The past was gone, and no matter how much I wished I could go back and undo the hurt, I couldn't. But there was a part of me that wanted to believe that it wasn't over, that there was still a chance for us. Maybe I was being naive, maybe I was fooling myself, but I held on to that thought. I wanted to believe that the love we shared wasn't something that could just disappear overnight. But every time I thought about reaching out, about trying to repair the damage, I stopped myself. I didn't know if I had the right to ask him to come back. I didn't know if I could handle the pressure of trying to make everything work again. It was in these moments of doubt, when I was at my lowest, that I started to realize something crucial. Something that I had been avoiding, something that had been staring me in the face all along. I needed to learn to trust myself again. I needed to trust that I had made the right decision for me, even if it was hard, even if it meant walking away from someone I loved deeply. I needed to understand that my happiness wasn't dependent on anyone else. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about us. It was about me and what I needed to do to move forward. And that was terrifying. But at the same time, it was liberating. I was learning that it was okay to be alone. I was learning that I didn't need to be in a relationship to feel complete. For the first time in a long time, I was beginning to see the strength in standing on my own, in making decisions that were right for me, even if they didn't make sense to anyone else. I wasn't sure what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever find my way back to him, or if I would ever be able to look at him the same way again. But I knew that, for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like I was in control of my own life again. I remember the exact moment when I realized that this wasn't just about him or about us anymore. It was about something bigger, something I had been running from for so long. It was about my own growth, my own journey. There was a part of me that knew I had to make a decision, one that would shape the rest of my life, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I kept thinking back to all the times we had spent together, the memories we had created, the dreams we had shared. I couldn't deny that part of me still wanted him. That part of me still longed for the life we had, for the connection we once shared. But as time went on, I realized that those dreams were built on a version of us that no longer existed. We had both changed. And while love was still there, the relationship had evolved into something neither of us could recognize anymore. I knew I had to face the reality of the situation, even though it was painful. The truth was, we had drifted apart. We had both allowed ourselves to become different people, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't go back. It hurt to admit that. It hurt to accept that the person I had once been with, the person I had loved, might not be the person I needed in my life anymore. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. The hardest part wasn't just letting go of the relationship. It was letting go of the person I had imagined him to be. It was saying goodbye to a version of him that existed in my heart, but not in reality. In the end, I had to make the decision to let him go. I had to let go of the past and the idea of what our future could have been. I needed to give myself the chance to move forward, to find out who I was without him. It was the most painful decision I've ever made, but I knew deep down that it was the right one. And while I didn't know what the future held, I knew that I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't meant to be. I couldn't keep waiting for a love that no longer fit who I was becoming. I had to let go of the past, painful as it was, and trust that the right path would reveal itself when the time was right. In that moment, as I let go, I also felt a strange sense of freedom. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but I began to realize that the hardest decisions are often the ones that bring the most growth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly moving forward. I had let go, but I was also learning to let myself be free. The days after my decision were filled with a strange silence. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment, as if everyone around me was living their lives in fast forward while I was stuck in slow motion, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I kept asking myself if I had made the right choice. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever find peace again. The weight of the silence was overwhelming. It wasn't just the absence of him. It was the absence of us. The empty space between what had been and what could have been was suffocating. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't outrun the loneliness that crept up on me, filling every corner of my heart, every inch of my mind. At times, I could almost feel his presence, as if he were still there beside me. But when I reached out, there was nothing, just emptiness. There were moments when I thought I could hear his voice, faintly, calling out to me from the past. But when I turned around, there was only silence. I hated that silence. It was a constant reminder of the choice I had made, the choice to walk away from something that had once felt so real, so full of love and possibility. But with that silence came a realization I wasn't prepared for. I had become comfortable in the absence of him. It was hard to admit, but I was starting to see that I had grown used to being alone, to the quiet that came with it. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. On one hand, I knew I needed this time to myself. I needed to rediscover who I was without the weight of a relationship defining me. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing something vital, something that once brought me so much joy. And in the midst of all this, I started to question my own feelings. Had I really loved him? Or had I just loved the idea of what we could have been? I couldn't tell anymore. The line between love and dependence had blurred so much that it was hard to distinguish where one ended and the other began. I had spent so much time in the relationship, so much time wrapped up in what we were and what we could be, that I had forgotten who I was before him. I had forgotten that I was someone before I became his wife, someone with dreams, ambitions, and desires that were separate from our life together. And now, in the silence, I was forced to confront that woman again. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. I began to remember parts of myself that I had neglected for so long. I started to reconnect with my own passions, my own goals, my own voice. I began to realize that I had been so focused on him, on us, that I had lost sight of what made me happy on my own. The silence, painful as it was giving me the space I needed to rediscover that. And with that rediscovery came something I hadn't expected, a sense of peace. It wasn't an immediate peace. It wasn't something that came overnight, but it was a quiet, gentle feeling that settled in my heart, telling me that I was on the right path. The more time passed, the more I understood that the silence wasn't a void. It wasn't a place of emptiness. It was a place of healing. A place where I could finally breathe again, where I could finally hear my own thoughts without the constant noise of our past. I started to understand that sometimes letting go of something or someone isn't about forgetting or abandoning it. It's about creating space for yourself, for your own growth, your own healing. And in that space, I began to grow stronger. I wasn't just healing from the relationship, I was healing from the person I had become in it. The silence, the loneliness, was not a punishment. It was a gift that allowed me to rebuild myself from the inside out. And as much as it hurt to admit it, I was starting to see that this was what I needed all along. I needed to be alone. I needed to learn to be content with myself before I could be content with anyone else. The weight of the silence was no longer a burden. It was a reminder that I had the strength to stand on my own, that I could find my way back to who I was before everything changed. And with that, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally coming home to myself. It's strange how the past has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. I had been doing my best to move forward, to live in the present, to focus on my own healing. I had come to terms with the fact that my relationship with him was over, that we had both moved on in our own ways. But then, one day, I ran into him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I was prepared for. It happened so suddenly, in the middle of a crowded street, under the glaring lights of a city that felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. For a split second, I thought my heart would stop. There he was, standing in front of me, looking just as I remembered, with those same familiar eyes that had once made me feel safe, loved, and understood. It felt like time had warped, like we had never truly been apart. I was frozen, unsure of how to react, unsure of what to say. He, too, looked taken aback. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, staring at each other, as if everything we had been through was forgotten in that brief moment of connection. He was the first to break the silence, his voice hesitant, almost shy. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How have you been?" The question seemed so simple, yet in that moment, it felt loaded with 1,000 unsaid words. I wanted to answer honestly, to tell him that I was doing okay, that I was finally finding peace, but I couldn't. It felt wrong to say that to him. How could I explain to him that, while I had been healing, I had also been moving on? That the woman standing in front of him wasn't the same one who had loved him so fiercely, so blindly? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I've been good," I finally said, my voice shaky, but steady enough to mask the flood of emotions rising within me. "I'm figuring things out." He nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. The same sadness I had seen when he left, when he realized he couldn't be who I needed him to be. We stood there for a few moments, exchanging pleasantries, but it felt hollow, like we were both playing roles in a scene that no longer belonged to us. It wasn't real. It wasn't the relationship we once had. And it was in that moment when I looked at him that I realized just how much had changed. I didn't feel the same pull towards him that I once did. The longing, the desire, the need to make things right, it was all gone. Instead, I felt a strange sense of detachment, a calm acceptance that we were two different people now, each on our own path. He could see it too, I think. The shift in me, the distance between us. I could tell by the way he looked at me, like he was searching for something, anything, that could bring us back together. But there was nothing. I had already let go. And somehow, in that moment, I realized that I was no longer afraid of losing him. I was no longer afraid of facing the past because I had finally accepted that it was in the past. The version of me that had loved him with all her heart was no longer who I was. And though that version of our relationship would always be a part of me, I knew I couldn't go back to it. I had moved forward, and he had too, in his own way. We were both different now, and that was okay. There was no anger, no bitterness, no resentment. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes people grow apart, not because of something bad, but because they are meant to find their own paths. I left the encounter feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. It wasn't the closure I thought I needed, but it was enough. Enough to know that I had made the right decision for myself. Enough to know that I could look him in the eye, not with sadness or regret, but with peace. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the past with me anymore. As time passed, I began to understand something important. Healing isn't linear. It doesn't follow a straight path from pain to peace, from heartbreak to happiness. There are moments when you feel strong, like you've finally found your footing, only to be hit with a wave of grief that knocks you off balance. It was in these moments that I realized just how much I had been avoiding the depth of my emotions. The silence that had once felt like freedom now felt like a quiet that screamed, urging me to confront everything I had buried deep inside. The memories of us, of him, kept resurfacing, not as flashes of anger or regret, but as soft, quiet reminders of the life we once had. I didn't know if I could ever completely let go of those memories. They were a part of me, part of my story, part of my journey. But I also knew that I couldn't keep holding on to them forever. It was time to create new memories, to build a new future, and I couldn't do that while still living in the shadow of the past. The quiet that surrounded me now wasn't just a reflection of my solitude. It was a space I was creating for myself to grow, to heal, and to rediscover what it meant to live for me, and only me. I began to focus more on my own life, on the things that made me happy, the things I had neglected for so long. I started exploring new passions, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering the woman I had once been. It was a slow process, but it was a process I was grateful for. For the first time in a long time, I was learning to stand on my own without the weight of a past relationship holding me down. And in that stillness, I found something beautiful: peace. Not the kind of peace you find when everything is perfect, but the kind of peace that comes when you accept where you are, even if it's not where you thought you would be. I had learned that sometimes the hardest part of letting go isn't the actual act of leaving, it's the letting go of the person you once were with that person. It's the acceptance that you can't go back, and that moving forward means creating a new version of yourself. And while that was scary, it was also freeing. I wasn't running away from my past anymore. I was running towards the future, and that felt like a step in the right direction. So here I am, still on this journey of self-discovery, still healing, still learning. But I know that I'm not the same person I was when all of this began. I've changed. I've grown. And that's something I'll carry with me forever. If you've been touched by this story and feel that these moments deserve to be remembered and shared, please consider subscribing to keep these stories alive. There's a place for all of us to share our truths and support each other through our journeys. And I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you? Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved, even when you weren't ready to? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all here to listen and understand. Our stories matter. The pain, the growth, the healing, it's all part of the human experience. And if you feel moved, explore more of these powerful stories. You'll find them in our playlist, linked in the description or in the pinned comment. Together, let's keep these stories alive.